My name is Chris Chavez. I'm the director of the Center for Latina, Latino, and Latin American Studies. Again, one of the most important things that we do is to be able to fund research from our graduate students and our faculty that are centered around Latinx issues in Latin America, and all of the transnational connections in between. And we're proud to present our very first research presentation of the year. This is from Sofia Vicente-Vidal, a PhD candidate in the Department of Anthropology, who is connecting with us in the field right now. And so you are in Tulum, see? Yeah. And so, so I'm doing some really important research, and her presentation today is going to be called Find Yourself in Tulum, Maya Labor, Tourism, Development, and Soul Searching in the Mexican Caribbean. And to present Sofia is Lynn Steeman, who is the Philip H. Knight Chair, Distinguished Professor of Arts and Sciences, and Professor in Anthropology. Please join me in welcoming both Sofia and Lynn. Thank you.
Hey. Hi, everybody. Great to see everyone. Great to see Sofia. And I love this reporting from the field. I think this might be a first in the CLLAS series of, live action fieldwork reporting. So I'm really delighted to introduce Sofia Vicente-Vidal, who Chris said is a fourth year PhD student in the Department of Anthropology. Sofia has done other research in the Yucatan as well, and a different site in Chichen Itza, and actually wrote an award-winning paper that was based on her master's work. She won a paper award from the Association of Latino and Latina Anthropologists, which is a really big honor. And she did that not as a PhD student, but as an MA student. Her research now is funded not only through the CLLAS grant, but through the Sasakawa Young Leadership Fellowship for International Research, which is a highly competitive grant in the University of Oregon system, which is also helping to support this work along with the CLLAS grants. So really grateful to both of those sources to fund this exciting project. I think this is also an important project with significant public impact in defining how wage work in the luxury hotel industry affects the physical, mental, and emotional health of Indigenous workers in Yucatan, Mexico. And Sofia is not only doing research, but she also has a plan for communicating some of her findings to workers and other stakeholders through radio programming. And I think that's part of the leadership part of this other kind of grant, is thinking about how to give back that information. And in Mexico, travel GDP is huge. Before COVID, it was about 9.63 trillion globally, and also very significant in Mexico. So tourism is one of the big income generators everywhere related to gentrification, environmental issues, and many challenges. So I think Sofia's project really offers a unique view, because often tourism development is promoted as advancing local opportunities and increasing the quality of life for workers through the possibility of increased income. But her project really takes a holistic evaluation of the impact of tourism for workers, looking at their overall well-being, their health, their joy, what else do they do with their life. So I think it provides a really rich framework, not only for this case study, but for really rethinking how we look at tourism and tourism development around the world. So I'm really happy to be here. I'll be moderating questions, and look forward to hearing from Sofia.
Well, thank you, Lynn. Thank you. Okay, let me share this. And put it in a presenter view. Sorry. Okay, so like Lynn said, my presentation today is titled Find Yourself in Tulum, Maya Labor, Tourism Development, and Soul Searching in the Mexican Caribbean. And this is just an image of an ad that's right before the ticket office of the Tulum Archaeological Zone. And I thought that it perfectly kind of encapsulated some of the themes that I'm going to touch upon. This is just kind of like one aspect of the project, but I just thought it was perfect because it references the way that spiritual tourism is marketed for travelers from the global north, specifically people from an affluent socioeconomic background. Okay. So just to kind of orient us, I know probably everyone knows where the Yucatan Peninsula is, but this is the peninsula right here. It kind of like cuts in between the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea. And then this map down here, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but the map on the right is a closer view of the peninsula, and that blue dot right here is Tulum. And right now there's only one big international airport in Cancun, so people have to travel down by bus or by car to Tulum, but there is a plan to create an international airport in Tulum. And then this is Tulum itself. So these white and red lines, like outline, all of that stretch of beach, all of that stretch by the coast is the hotel zone. And then this main road, the 15, that's the road that cuts across from Tulum Centro, which is this where that blue dot is. This is kind of the downtown area where most people work and live. And then if you look to the left side of the 15, there's like right before you hit the shore, that is the expat community where I'm currently living. Okay, so part of the purpose of this project, like some of the bigger, broader questions that I am thinking about, the first one is like, what does it mean to endeavor to find oneself, and what makes Tulum a place that tourists visit with that explicit goal of finding themselves? And how can we directly address the contradictions between efforts toward like spiritual growth that remain bound by the neoliberal imperatives of the spiritual tourism industry? And then in what ways might a popular appropriation of tourism development transform spiritual tourism to more closely align with a spirituality that is conceived beyond the corrosive and reductive imagination of neoliberal capitalism? And I think that question is more where I'm going to be asking like smaller sub questions about the embodied experiences of Maya wage workers and how their experiences and the embodied effects of their labor actually kind of completely undermines or creates the paradox of this like wellness kind of image and narrative that goes into the marketing of a place like Tulum. So some of the background ideas and like theoretical underpinnings that I rely on are post-development studies, ideas of coloniality or the coloniality of being. And I just started reading more literature into like a subset of tourism studies, which is specifically focused on spiritual tourism. And there's all kinds of spiritual tourism, but I'm reading mainly stuff about like secular spirituality that kind of combines all of these kind of appropriate ideas, like, you know, yoga from the East and like Tai Chi and all of these different ideas that kind of like amalgamate into like a secular form of spiritual tourism. And then I am still drawing on some feminist studies, specifically ideas about like self-love and healing and how work on like that individual scale can also transform society, kind of like the idea of a fractal. So yeah, these are just kind of the background ideas. So concepts of post-development studies, this is kind of the real like anchor of a lot of the ideas that go into this project. I think I need to see my notes for this one, so I might have to, sorry, give me just a moment. Oh yeah, sorry, I know you can see my notes, but we couldn't figure out how to do it without it. So yes, so these elements of for post-development studies, basically post-development examines strategies of state building that are premised on what Ai Ong calls basic goals of producing and governing middle classes and forming links with global capital. And so I branch out from these two elements of state building that she proposes, which is the first is like producing and governing middle classes. So creating subjectivities in people that are amenable to the labor necessary for a particular industry, and then forming links with global capital through, incentivizing foreign direct investment. And then this other idea by James Scott pretty much complements that first element that Ong stated. And Scott just like describes the connections between state bureaucratic logic and the logic of commercial global capital that share in the goal of making human subjects legible through standardized forms of measurement like citizenship, gender, race, and ethnicity. And that's very evident in Tulum, as the entire labor system is racially hierarchy, basically. And then I adopted, or I also rely on this idea of dualist ontology and objectivity from Escobar. He writes that this objectivizing stance of dualist ontology has led to the ethos of human dominion over nature that forms the basis of patriarchal culture in capitalist societies. And by questioning the belief in a single objective reality, we can begin to understand and to expand our thinking of what we believe can be real and possible. He also brings up this notion, which I think is really interesting, of the core principle of interdependence in Buddhism, because it illustrates the limitations of dualist ontology. So the core principle of interdependence directly appends the idea that individual entities exist discretely by themselves. As Escobar writes, for Buddhism, nothing exists intrinsically, everything is mutually constituted. The mind is thus completely devoid of subject-object dualism. This means that there is no world that is real out there for us to observe objectively, because every being is made of everything and is at once also making everything. And then at the root of the idea of an increasingly overpowering globalization is the view that modernity is an essentially European phenomenon. And holding on to the assumption that globalization and modernity are inextricable from hegemony and imperialism is what keeps us stuck thinking that globalization and modernity can't be anything other than a hegemonic imperialist like discursive structure of existence. And so Escobar proposes to interpret modernity from the space of the colonial difference, which is from the perspective of people who are kind of marginalized and made legible only for like specific subjectivities that are for the neoliberal incentives of any particular industry. Escobar also references the need for ethnographies of modernity that focus on the ways in which the ideas and practices of modernities are appropriated and re-embedded in local life worlds, resulting in multiple local or mutant modernities. And I think this project is my attempt at trying to kind of create an ethnography of modernity that's from this like fractured locus, featuring the perspectives and conceptualizations of well-being and spirituality of people that work to prop up the entire spiritual tourism industry in Tulum. So I also adopt basically this perspective by Soderbergh that the nation state is actually a moment of capital relation, and she calls the nation state basically an extended competition state. So it points directly to the complicity between the nation state and capital. And she basically says that the state their role is basically to mediate the tensions and crises between capital and labor, using their legitimate monopoly on state violence and political authority to neutralize dissent and to discipline laborers into exploitative work. So it's just kind of like a summary of the theoretical underpinnings. Well, one of them actually, sorry, there's another one. So I've just started getting into the literature of spiritual tourism, and basically the scholars are talking about a lot of what these scholars of coloniality and post-development studies have mentioned, that there's neocolonial underpinnings of spiritual tourism. There's a massive paradox that is presented by the material realities in Tulum, and they're erased from the marketing narrative of spiritual tourism because its direct confrontation would necessitate an interrogation of the political, social, and economic systems that prop up the industry. And so I'm coming from this argument that this fact, this massive paradox, is what renders tourists' efforts at finding oneself through spiritual tourism partial and ineffective. And following Escobar's idea of these different kinds of ethnographies of modernities, we need the perspectives of wage workers and local indigenous residents to highlight the shortfalls of the spiritual tourism industry and to help us imagine and conceptualize different versions of modernity and tourism. Let me go back to this slide view. So something that was that I really am trying to work on is trying to like get a concrete conceptualization of spirituality, because it's kind of like this nebulous thing that can mean very different things to different people. But some of the general attributes of spirituality have been theorized by scholars in the field of humanistic and transpersonal psychology. And they just kind of come up with these broad, there's much more like like dimensions to each of these three broad attributes, but just for now, one of the tenets that they attribute to spirituality is that it addresses existential and transcendent issues, such as those concerning one's relations with others and one's place in the cosmos, and a conviction that life is meaningful and purposeful is quintessential to spirituality. That spirituality is located in the domain of cardinal and superordinate values underlying all aspects of life, such as respect for life and love of humanity. And the third, that spirituality is characterized by self-reflectiveness and is hence metacognitive in nature. So basically thinking and reflecting about how you think. So that's just kind of like my initial kind of grasp of that concept of spirituality, a working concept. So kind of what I mentioned earlier with Escobar, the coloniality of being from the perspective of people who are in the margins, how can we create alternative imaginaries from that space, so that we can come up with different ways of imagining what tourism might look like in the future. And so we need the embodied experiences. We need to understand the embodied experiences of wage workers in the Tulum hotel zone and the broader tourist area. So this is the story of Maria. Well, just kind of from an informal conversation that we had. She's 35. She moved from Veracruz to Quintana Roo to work in the hotel zone, or not the hotel zone, the downtown tourist area. She runs a satellite taco shop in the Centro, which is the downtown area pictured here. I'll just read her story. And this is kind of, I think, where the thinking and feeling from the fractured locus of the colonial difference like shines through. So I met Maria by chance. I was walking along the street looking for a place to eat. On the corner of the street by my house is a small taco shop. On the left was Maria cooking over a flat pane grill with separate mounds of carne asada, arrachera, and other meats. The place was empty except for a pair of friends seated at a table in the front. I went up to Maria and asked for an adobada quesadilla and 2 tacos arrachera. The shop was run by her and one young man server. Maria's 8-year-old daughter was hanging out at the table next to mine watching videos on a phone. After the pair of friends left, Maria and the young man sat down at the table with Maria's daughter. I was the only other person in the shop, and no other patrons stopped in for a long while. I asked for some tinfoil to wrap my quesadilla to go, and we laughed because I came in super hungry and I had ordered way more food than I could eat. Um, and then we just talked for the next 45 minutes about all manner of things. But it was, I'm just going to paraphrase a lot of our conversation, but some of the most salient experiences that Maria relayed to me. So the shop is a smaller offshoot of a flagship taco shop that is like located more in the central tourist hotel zone. But the owner sends Maria and the server to run this satellite shop location. She lives about a 40-minute walk from the satellite taco shop, and her daughter walk from their home on the outskirts of Tulum Centro. She tells me that the roads aren't paved and there are rolling blackouts that last for hours and sometimes days. Now it's just her and her daughter since they moved to Tulum from her hometown in Veracruz. Her domestic partner was verbally and physically abusive and then started a new family with someone else. Her eyes welled up with tears as she described how she doesn't feel loved and supported by her family, who instead undermined her sense of self-worth through constant critiques and put downs. She gestured toward her daughter with a nod and said that she often takes her stress out on her, even though she doesn't want to. When she finally gets home and lays down on her bed, she doesn't really want to cuddle up, even though her daughter climbs in to lay down and hug her. She wiped away tears as she explained that sometimes she just can't take it. Her life is work every day, over and over again. She said she wishes she could rest and then go out to dance and have a good time. So that was just some of the most salient parts of the conversation. And I felt like it was important because it shows the fact that the way that time is like meted out and governed for someone who is working class, or it basically dictates the way that they get to mete out their time and their energy. And I think that part of wellness, like this is another kind of highlight of a paradox. Like part of wellness is being able to have enough of the time, the energy, and access to basic resources to be able to take care of oneself. And she even mentioned that it depletes her energy of even being able to like offer her daughter like a certain degree of affection. So yeah, I just thought that was a really poignant conversation. So this is a different story and a different, shorter, informal conversation with Luis, which is also a pseudonym. He works on a public beach, Playa Santa Fe. This is actually like much closer to the actual archaeological zone. And he's a contractor for a boat company. And I thought this was really interesting because for the past maybe 7 years, starting in 2015, there's been kind of an influx of sargassum, which is a species of seaweed that has been growing exponentially. And for some reason of the currents of the ocean, it brings it up into the Caribbean coast of the peninsula. And in this picture, you can see there's this little tractor that's like picking it up and removing it and putting it in different piles. And so that's kind of how it's been dealt with because there is no infrastructure to deal with the amounts of sargassum that is coming up to the shore. And this is on a public beach, so they probably have much less resources in the hotel zone. Hotels actually find their own ways to address this problem. Some hotels might have like acreage where they can actually like throw all the sargassum and let it dry out of sight, and kind of at a distance. So because after it dries out, it starts to smell really bad. And it also can cause respiratory issues because it lets out some gas. But yeah, so Luis basically found like this is like a newly carved out industry that has popped up as a result of this sargassum accumulation on the shores. So the famous teal blue ocean water sometimes you can see it in certain, they've like people have learned how to predict like when the sargassum will be on the shore and when it might not. But this industry has basically popped up where you have these contractors who tourists who contract to take you out on a small boat out past this like milky brown coffee colored water, like that's right in front of the shore, so that you can actually like swim in teal blue water, which is a lot of people want pictures in that water, and you can also like swim with the turtles. But it's there's a lot of things that kind of struck me about the way that the public beaches are organized. So it's all sectioned off with like cords and buoys. And so there's just one particular section where people who want to go to the public beach can actually like go into the water. And then all of the other spaces are also corded off, and they're just for like stationing these boats and for tourists who want to contract them. So it's not like you can go to the beach and just kind of like go in wherever you want. It's very structured, and there's like a segmentation of the beach, of the shoreline. Okay, and then I had a conversation with an official from the Tulum Hotel Association, and we talked about his perspectives and kind of like the collective hotel proprietors' perspectives about the Maya train. And it wasn't super favorable. I've gotten like a mixed bag of people's perspectives on the Maya train, but according to him, for hotel proprietors, it's more of a performative, kind of like a symbolic project, like a legacy project for President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Because he says that their main concerns are about security and sustainability. So you can't have a secure tourist zone if police are not making a living wage, and they live on the outskirts of Tulum, where about 7,500 families and their homes are without running water. They don't have trash collection. They may or may not have consistent access to electricity. And so one of the efforts that the Hotel Association has been working towards is to increase police wages and to give them benefits like Social Security and life insurance and health insurance. And then another concern that he thinks that the Maya train kind of like ignores is the lack of adequate infrastructure. So the way that Tulum kind of like evolved into a tourist area is very different from Cancun, which was a planned like state-backed effort. Tulum kind of began as like the antithesis of Cancun, and like it's like mega hotel like packages, and the selling point at first was that it was, you're much closer to nature. There's not all these people. It's like you're roughing it. That's kind of where that whole self-development and spirituality and wellness idea came from. And so it was very like an uneven, unplanned tourism area. So it lacks adequate infrastructure to be able to even sustain the local population, people who already live here, who have been here. And the way that the hotel zone kind of deals with the lack of infrastructure, I mean, they have their own water treatment plants, they have their own backup generators, and that's obviously not something that people without the capital can do. And so the Maya train is kind of like a something that they're not really excited about, because if they do anticipate a higher volume of tourists coming into the zone, the infrastructure is not there, and it might just further take away from any possible resources that'll go to local families who don't have running water or trash collection or electricity in the first place. Yeah, so basically just as a whole, spiritual tourism in Tulum is kind of characterized by spatial segregation. The main hotel zone is cost, costly prohibitive. I don't think I could even go eat at a restaurant there. Oh, and that's another thing. The beaches, access to the beaches are like you have to have a minimum consumption, which is like 200 pesos, like, oh no, actually 400 pesos, which is like $22, just to be able to step foot on their portion of the beach. Um, it's also characterized by racialized labor hierarchies. They're also gendered. Women usually are kind of relegated to domestic labor, cleaning, como camareras. Obviously, the appropriation of natural resources and foreign direct investment. Oh, and just something else that I want to mention about the Tren Maya is a lot of the planification didn't take into account the actual like natural landscape of the peninsula. It's all limestone rock, and so when they began to cut, break ground, um, you end up hitting cenotes or like these caves, and all of that water is the drinking water for the people of Tulum and the peninsula, and so there's potentially catastrophic repercussions. And this is just kind of like some of the advertising for these wellness programs that are offered. I just thought they're emblematic of that disconnect and that paradox between the way that spirituality and wellness is marketed to a global elite class of travelers from the north, with like the fact that local people and workers don't have the luxury of thinking about this kind of like taking the time to take care of their well-being. Yeah. So thank you, CLAS, for sponsoring this research. Thank you so much. Thanks to Eli, Feather, and Janice for organizing this event, and to everyone who showed up. Thanks for listening. And I'm really looking forward to your questions and your feedback and any suggestions that you have for me to expand and refine my project. Thank you.